And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, I'm Tom Vasel, and today we're taking a look at Catan Histories, Rise of the Inkas. Now, Catan is really been out for many years now. I think we're on the 23rd year of this game being released, and it's a very popular game, and there's been many variations on it. This one I didn't know a whole lot about. The last themed version of Catan was the Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire themed one. This one here is based on history. It's called Catan Histories. It's kind of a series that they've been doing for, I think, a decade or so now. And in this one, you are settling the Andes. There's a theme there. But in this one, there's this theme of decay and fall of different tribes. Here's how it plays. So in this game, you're setting things up just like you would a normal setup of Catan. And if you don't know how to play Catan, then you should go watch a review of that. Because I'm just going to basically be talking about the differences here from this game and basic Catan. This is the starting setup. It can be slightly different from this. But in this game, you roll dice like normal. But instead of there just being the 5 basic resources, there's also fish, feathers, and then the leaves down here. These are the 3. These are like an upgraded type of resource that you can get. Now, these resources themselves are not used to build anything. Instead, you can trade them in. They're goods cards. So, just like normal, you can trade with other players on your turn. You can also trade in 3 of a kind for 1 of another. There's no harbors in this game. You can trade in the goods, though, 2 goods for 1, or 1 of each type of good for any 2 cards of your choice. So goods are used solely to trade with to get the resources you need. When building, you can build roads like normal, settlements like normal, upgrade settlements to cities, and buy developmental cards. And developmental cards are split between 1 and 2. You can't buy 2s until you are in your second tribe. Developmental cards, there's no longer victory point cards in these cards. These will instead, they give you combat arts, which basically lets you get the largest army, or the mightiest combat arts it's called. And there are progress cards, which just let you do things like place 2 roads for free. So there's various cards in here, but there's really not a ton of differential ones between them. The longest road and biggest army still exist, except now they are called the longest trade route and the mightiest combat arms. Longest trade route goes first person to build 3, and then whoever has the most. And it lets you trade 1 for 1 once per turn. Mightiest combat arts is pretty much identical to largest army. First person to play 2 warrior cards, and you can get rid of the robber. The robber still shows up. The robber will still come in and steal from people who are adjacent to it. Now, the main change in this game, though, is not adding the goods, it's having this. Players are going to build 3 tribes over the course of the game. The first person to fill in all the tokens of the 3rd tribe is the winner. Every time you add a settlement or upgrade to a city, you are going to get another token here. You start with 2 from your initial 2 settlements. And you can have 4 settlements or 2 settlements in a city. When you add your 4th one, your first tribe is finished. So let's say, for example, I'm the gray player, and so I build another settlement here, and then get some roads out, and I build another settlement over here. So my 4 settlements. When I go into decline, I'm going to take these green vines, and this shows that vines are going to grow up over these cities. These cities are still mine of sorts, but they are and they'll still get me some resources, but I can no longer add roads to those sections and things like that. Instead, I will immediately get a new settlement that I'll place somewhere else, and that starts my 2nd tribe. I or other players, if they get next to these, so let's say the blue player comes in, they can actually build over one of these with their own. And so it's a way to kind of, and also when you go into decline, all your trade routes disappear too. So you just have a bunch of cities that are, and settlements that are set on the board, but they can be built over by other players. And so you start in a new spot, and then you'll build up from that one. And when that one has 4 settlements or 2 settlements in a city, then that one finishes. Same thing happens, and you start your 3rd one, and you just need to get 1 settlement in a city or 3 settlements. The first person to do that is the winner. That's basically how you play. Now, I'm kind of mixed minds on the components of this game because on one hand, I'm glad Asmodee has Catan now because it looks nicer. On the other hand, Asmodee has Catan now. Why does it still not look that good? I mean, we still have tiles that are white on one side. These plastic pieces, like, wow, they look initially nice until you look closer, and then they almost look like they were made on a 3D printer. And then the tiles look fine. I mean, it's not that they don't look bad, but there's kind of this disjunction here between, well, that's pretty cool looking. I like the background here. Then this one, which has a big leaf in it. They just don't seem to match. And even like the fish tiles, and these tiles are just not good quality. It's kind of like they took this same old Mayfair quality that used to make Catan. And then these plastic containers, they're okay, but they don't stack very well. In the box, you actually have to take the cards out to stack them, which is kind of a pain. And then the boards themselves are just blah. And I know this sounds harsh because if you take a look like this, if I just took a snapshot of this, that looks good. That looks pretty. And I think people will like how that looks. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at the components up close, they're just okay. Now, we joked when we were talking about this game that possibly the Toybers had played Small World right beforehand and said, this Decline of Civilization is something we can stick in our game. After playing this one, I'm inclined to think that that may actually be what happened, right? This is definitely a game in which there's definitely a kind of a sine wave here of you're doing well, then you're not doing so well, then you're doing well, then not doing so well. So there's a couple of things of note here. I've already talked a little bit about components. Forget about components. Let's just talk about the game itself. If you like Catan, will you like this? If you love Catan, will you like this? If you don't like Catan, will you like this? First of all, if you don't like Catan, this will not improve your thoughts on the game at all. If you do like Catan, well, I don't really know what to tell you, and here's why. After playing this, I think I've come to the conclusion that I no longer am a personal big fan of Catan. I think it's a fine game. I think it's done wonders for the hobby. I just think for me personally, rolling dice and getting resources, there are a lot of games that do that very quickly. This one takes a while, saving up and then having the robber take away half your resources. Not so exciting anymore. So that, blah. But this seems to take it and make it worse, in my opinion. I love the concept of the vines coming up on top of the cities. That's pretty cool. And then everything blows up and you start from a new spot. And it's interesting because Rubble's like, hey, think very carefully where you put that third spot. Very carefully. Well, no kidding. Why don't you say that in like regular Catan, where putting in bad spots at the beginning can ruin your whole game? Nothing is new here. But that vine coming up and smashing your cities and starting over again, that's really neat. Except it makes it less fun. See, this game is less fun for a couple reasons. In Catan, as the game goes by, you get more and more settlements and more cities, and you're starting to bring in lots of cards. The robber will hit you, which is not so great, but you get more cards, that's not a problem. Here, 1/3 of the way through, you're like, oh, I'm starting again, or at least declining, and people are building up, and I'm getting worse and worse, but now I'm getting a little bit better, and boom, it happens again. I just don't find that very interesting. I mean, it's interesting in concept and theory, it's just not as fun to play. Secondly, those good cards are snooze-worthingly boring. They are simply there to trade to get other resources. Big deal. Fish, feathers, and leaves, they mean nothing between the three of them. There's no difference. They're all the same, except they're different. You know, you need different ones. At least in the original one, wood and brick. I know I need that to build a thing, and that's what this game does too. Fish and leaf. Nothing really. 2 fish, you can trade those in for a resource, which makes trading with other players less interesting in this game, which is problematic because trading with other players is the whole basis upon which Catan was built. It's not built to trade with the game itself. You can do that if everything else fails. This one really pushes you the longest trade route, and these new goods push you to trade with the game more than with other players. You can still trade with other players and it still works. It's just less exciting. And then they really nerfed the improvement deck. People take it because they want the largest war party or whatever, but there's so few other interesting cards in there. There's no victory point cards in there. It's a whole lot less interesting, and honestly, it seems like they took Catan and made it worse. Catan is a great system that has surpassed the test of time. It's a game that a lot of people grow out of. A lot of people started with Catan and no longer enjoy it. But I don't think even if you still enjoy Catan, you want to play this. And I definitely want to introduce it to people who start. This is probably my least favorite variant of Catan, period. I just found it to be boring. They took out things that were fun. And while the concepts of it, conceptually, if you had explained this to me, I would have said, that sounds interesting. Let's try it out. Then I would have played it and said, oh, sounds interesting, but not fun to play. And that's my review. Dice Tower Judgment, didn't enjoy it.